Okay. Excited to present to you all. Here we go. So navigating tomorrow, AI-driven innovation for e-commerce. The first company I started back in 2003 was an e-commerce company, and I'm excited to share that story. And I'm also excited to share some of the new AI that's starting to show up this year and what that means for the future. So before I can talk about AI and technology, I need to talk about intelligence. And before I can talk about that, I need to talk about decisions. I'm sure there's people in the audience that recognize this photo. How many people in the audience know exactly which mountain this is? I don't see a lot of hands. That's surprising. So this mountain is very famous outside of Utah. So this is Mount Superior. It's across the street from Alta. And it has the nickname the Jewel of the Wasatch. So this is a top 50 backcountry ski descent in the entire US, and it's right here in Little Cottonwood Canyon. And the next photo I'm going to show you is at the top. And I like this photo. So this was me a couple years ago, and a lot of people climb this mountain and ski it. And the reason I like this photo is not what you see below. It's a reminder of what's happening inside. And so I'm holding still, and this is actually quite funny. Even though I'm holding still, if I'm wearing a heart rate monitor, my heart rate can peak as high as 170 beats per minute. Which, what does that mean? What's happening? So if my heart is peaking that high, it actually means that there's a part of my brain that is wide awake. It's the amygdala. I'm going to put my water down just a second. So the amygdala, I like to think of that as it's the lizard part of the brain. It's the primitive part of the brain. And it thinks it's going to die, which I think is quite funny because I've been hiking this mountain in the dark for 2.5 hours. It's almost like that part of the brain wasn't aware. But now it's in panic mode, and it thinks we're going to die. But the neocortex, the mammalian part of the brain, it knows we're going to die. It knows that. But it doesn't think we're going to die today. And it's actually doing something else. It's actively simulating a sequence of future events. And it's trying to determine if I have sufficient muscle memory to not have long-term consequence. And so every day we make decisions. Every day we make tens of thousands of decisions. And our experience is what drives that. I'm going to go through 4 slides that kind of walk you through my awkward career to where I ended up. So one of the first decisions I made when I went to college is I decided to live in the woods in the snow. This was in 2003. I was living outdoors in Logan. And this did make the news back then. And this is actually how I learned to program, because this was before social media. So I had to have a blog. I had to learn HTML, CSS. I had to learn how to program. And actually, the funny thing is I don't really know why I was doing this. I understand better now why I was doing this ridiculous thing to go live in the woods while I was studying engineering. But that allowed me to learn how to programming, and I started an e-commerce company selling rock climbing equipment. And it's kind of embarrassing to see this website. So this is built on an open source OS Commerce package. I learned PHP. And it was all trial by fire. So I did not know how to program. I was a chemical engineer. I was hosting the website in my apartment. We're talking MySQL servers, web servers, FTP servers, all hosted on laptops. I had credit cards that were going into those SQL databases unencrypted. But it's 2003, so it was OK. It was OK. And PHP, another experience I remember having is I did not know how to program in PHP. And I had to pay some computer science students to fix my production code because I got some curly bracket wrong, and I was so frustrated figuring it out. It almost feels like a drug deal, like meeting some computer science student and handing them some cash and then giving them access to your production system to see if they can troubleshoot this website that's down. But that later turned into computer vision. That turned into high-performance computing. And then a few years later, I find myself working in this room. So this is IM Flash. It's here in Utah. It's Intel and Micron. And this room was called the $1 billion room because there's literally $1 billion in this room. So each of those machines that you see, they can cost anywhere from $80 to $120 million for a single SKU. These are photolithography machines. They print the circuits. And the interesting thing in my career starting out is if I made a poor decision, I used to brag about working all night, skiing all day. You can kind of do it sometimes. I made some mistakes. And if you make some mistakes, you get your hand slapped. It's not that big of a deal. But after leaving Intel and Micron and going to work for a hedge fund, I was working at a high-performance computing hedge fund trading on the news in 2012. If you make a mistake with your code, if you come back to work and the Sharpe ratio, which is their unit of measure, is different than you said it was, it's the worst day of your life, which is funny because it can be much worse because this always changes over time. The worst day of your life today might not seem that bad in the future, and it can be worse. So I later joined HireVue. So HireVue is an HR tech company. They're backed by Sequoia here in Utah. And if you build an AI model that doesn't work, you could cause a class action lawsuit. You could actually, it could be the worst part of someone else's day. Like forget you having a bad day. You could ruin someone else's day. You could cause a class action lawsuit for another partner or group. And so this is something we took quite seriously when we were there, and they still take quite seriously, by the way. Humans have unconscious bias, all of us. If I could put 10,000 resumes through you and monitor how you're selecting people, it's quite difficult to not have this. And thankfully, with accountability and with algorithms, you can actually block adverse impact. And so we did some of the early work with adverse impact mitigation strategies. But there is an escalation in consequence. And there always is with AI, the higher the stakes are. So eventually after HireVue, I went and did a deep learning startup. And that was trial by fire. If you have a model that doesn't work as intended or as promised, you have to fire your friends. And that's part of being in business. And so I like to say that founders are my brothers and sisters, and I don't care if we're competitors, because there's very few people that understand the daily pit in the stomach, but also the awkwardness of closing a deal and being all excited and then having an issue. And so people often talk about the cyclical up and down. But I think it's one of the best ways that we learn. I think to share some quick insights from this experience, it's the interesting thing when I compare running a startup or being in a company to being an employee is being an employee, you can quit. So anyone who's an employee right now, if you have a bad day on Friday, you can quit. Send in your resignation. You can quit responsibly. Send in a resignation, quit in a month or in a few weeks. Go to Costa Rica for a few weeks. You'll be fine. You will be fine. It might not feel like it in the moment, but when you are doing a startup, you've raised capital from investors, you have customers that have committed themselves to work with you early on, and they have burned some political capital. That better have been a good decision. And then you have employees that are working for you under market. They're expecting upside. And so what does that do to someone? It puts you in this pressure cooker, which is pretty interesting. So the last 4 years, I sold that company to DataRobot. I worked on go-to-market for the last 4 years of my career, understanding sales and customer success for these AI platform companies. And so those decisions are all driven by intelligence that we all have through life experience. And to define intelligence, it is the acquisition of knowledge through experience and applying that knowledge to future decisions. So taking that definition, is this butterfly intelligent? Is it going to be smarter tomorrow? Let's actually do a very specific test. I'm going to poke this butterfly in the eye. And then tomorrow I'm going to do it again. This is a terrible test. Well, actually, we'll do a white paper. And we will decide if we see this butterfly turning away. And you could do that. That would be a terrible test. But let's take something like a dog. How many times can I poke that dog in the eye? Probably once. And it's going to remember for a long time that it doesn't like me. And so you can see this kind of this layering of intelligence in the animal kingdom. But if we compare that to a child, why are humans so different? The fascinating thing about humans is we have something that other animals do not have. We have the ability to hand our experience to someone else. So not only would I not be able to poke the same human in the eye again, if I left on a spaceship and went the speed of light and came back to Earth 1,000 years later, if I was known as the terrible eye poker, and if there were stories about me, that experience is eternal. I can no longer poke people in the eye. And so if you think about your own intelligence, how much wiser and smarter are you today compared to when you were as a child? Can you put a number on it? Are you twice as smart, 100 times smarter? It feels infinite, right? You feel overwhelmed by the comparison. But the fascinating thing, and this is where adults have anxiety, are you smarter today than you were yesterday? I think since we're at this conference, that is maybe not a good question to ask, but let's go back in time. Are you smarter Tuesday than you were Monday? Did you know that time is not a guarantee of increased intelligence? Did you know that the longer you are in a role, the less likely you are to innovate? Did you know there's something called neural rutting, that we are creatures of habit? And if I tailed you for 6 months and took all these notes, understanding what you do and how you do it, we would find that there's a lot of behaviors that you have that are very predictable. And so how do we stop that? How do we allow ourselves to stay on that path up and to the right? Well, one of the great ways to do it is you communicate with other humans. You want to communicate with people that are outside your tribe, and just like you have life experience that you can share, data is the experience of a company. The data that is flowing through your company is experience, it's shared memory. But unfortunately, most companies, if I don't know anything about your company, if I come in and audit you, it could be any company, I would suspect to find three things, three core issues. You don't leverage your data for better decisions, for the most part. Your knowledge workers leave, so you're losing knowledge. You can't keep that. And these issues are, and I'm blanking on the third one, let's see. So you don't use your data for better decision, knowledge workers leave. Oh, processes are stale. So if I come into a company and say, hey, how long have you done it this way? When's the last time you changed this particular process? Well, it turns out you haven't changed it for 5 years, 10 years, or you've never changed it. And that is not always an insult. There are some processes, if you change them on Friday, you are out of business next week or the week after. It's like some processes have high consequence. You do not change these processes casually. But the brilliant thing with AI is it actually addresses all three of these problems. So let's stick on the process problem. So if you have a process that is stale, and let's say I'm making fun of you, that you haven't changed this process for 10 years, how embarrassing. If I bring AI and if I have it train on that process, I'm not talking about automation. I'm just talking about having an AI model train on the process. The brilliant thing that will happen is the moment that model tells the process owner or the domain expert a story, that domain expert will have a light bulb. They will say, oh, that's garbage. I don't agree with what the AI model is saying is driving my process. Or they'll say, that's very interesting. I concur. I agree. And that will start a flurry of ideas and things that you can test. That I did not know that this particular driver was such a big driver for customer success, for lead scoring, for all these different things in the business. And so that is a gift. Humans can evolve a process. They can escape a process. And then knowledge, if you think about knowledge, when I was at Intel and Micron, you would have so many wikis. You try to document so many things. You might write tens of thousands of different words and documents that you're trying to help other humans. You're a junior engineer, read this stuff. No one has time to read that stuff. So knowledge is it's not a very good way to transfer knowledge between humans. Now, thanks to LLMs, you can consume a lot of knowledge. Everyone in the room can pool their life experience into these LLMs, and they can be summarized. They can be compared. If you have a question, there's a good chance that one of us already answered it, but we didn't know how to get it. Now we can get it. And then leveraging data for better decisions. Today, there is not a data type that can't be processed easily. Doesn't matter what it is, whether it's video, audio, text. You come up with a different data type. There's no issue with processing that, consuming that, and putting that into workflows. And so that is why we have these huge breakthroughs in AI on usefulness. So to take a quick tangent and tell a funny story. This was years ago, and the reason I'm telling the story is really to show the flexibility that you have on data types that you can consume and play with. So when reinforced learning was coming online, I don't know if you remember this, but there was a lot of excitement around reinforced learning playing these video games. But the problem is these are not my video games. I don't really care that AI, well, Doom was my video game when I was growing up, but I don't really care that AI can play these video games. I want it to play Call of Duty because I suck at Call of Duty, and I just want it to play so I can watch it play. And this is something I'm thinking about for several years, that it's not possible. And then I find on the internet that there's something called a gimmicks adapter, and it might be possible. And so I get this gimmicks adapter, and I hook it up, and within a few weeks, I realize that it is possible. I can actually have my Xbox just begin playing itself and get smarter and smarter. And so I call up Intel, and I end up getting a server shipped to my house, 3 terabytes of RAM, 196 Xeon cores, and it begins to play the Xbox. And this is something that is quite annoying for my spouse, because this machine is not meant to be in a residential home. In a 3-story home, you can hear it upstairs, whining, even with all the doors closed. I could actually hear it outside the home. And I was a little self-conscious that my neighbors might complain. And it was interesting. This starts playing itself. And so every morning when I'd wake up, you know when you wake up in the morning, you're a little delirious, like, oh, what day is it? What happened? I would wake up and I'd feel like Christmas. I'd be like, oh, my Xbox. And so I'd run downstairs, pour a cup of coffee, and I could hear it playing in the basement. And and I'd run downstairs. And I remember the first morning, you probably know where this story is going. The first morning that I watched it do this autonomous kill, you would think the researcher or the inner child would be like, yes. But I felt an opposite feeling. I felt a feeling that felt more like this, where I felt like I have a monster in my basement. And this image, which I quite like, I sat down with a designer at a coffee shop, and I said, on a napkin, I said, I want a boy playing the Xbox, and I want this monster on the other side of the screen, and it needs to be smarter than a human, it needs to see better than a human, it needs to be scary, and you need to convince me that it's consuming a terawatt of power. And this designer goes off and comes back, and he produces this. And so I asked people, how long did this take, and how much did it cost? And there's different numbers that people throw out there, $5,000, $1,000, a couple weeks. Well, I think it was $1,000 in 2 weeks. This is a good designer. And then this is my son, by the way. And then this is, hopefully the reality or the future that never comes when this thing gets out of the box, if it has ill intent. And the reason I show these two photos, I'm going to show you another photo. So if these photos were $1,000, 2 weeks, a really good designer, better than I will ever be in my life, how much did this cost, and how long did this take? For people in the room that understand design, because I've done some projects with Unreal Engine before, this is a very different request. If you demanded this type of a render or this type of a graphic in 2020, you could not do this in Photoshop. Because look, there's depth of field. See how the shoulder has some reflection? There's depth of field going on. You might have had to reach out to an Unreal Engine design group, and you are not talking about $1,000, and you are not talking about a week. You could be talking about tens of thousands of dollars, maybe closer to much higher than that, and it could take a few months. But you all know where I'm going with this. It was not that much. So this is Midjourney, this is pennies, and it took minutes. And if you haven't played with Midjourney yet, I love it. I think it's just an explosion of human creativity. My kids play with it. And so my sister-in-law is a ballerina dancer, and she was saying that this is garbage. Like she said, it's so fun what the human brain can do. And when you see these models, one of the things that's maybe harder for some of us to appreciate, but I definitely have an appreciation for it, is there's so much going on under the hood. And I'm going to show you what I mean by that. For me, I just love this stuff. It's so fun. You can do this stuff for hours. So this one it's telling the story that I want to tell. So if you ask AI to describe SpaceX as a creature, so keep in mind that I don't have my fingers, I'm not dictating what this creature looks like. You just ask AI, describe SpaceX as a creature. It writes out this big prompt, and then takes that prompt and it puts it into Midjourney, and it produces this. This is pretty remarkable. And if this doesn't prove the point, then this one definitely will. So asking AI to describe McDonald's as a creature, so when people see this, and keep in mind, this isn't one creature. If you wanted a portfolio of hundreds or thousands of McDonald creatures, they're coming. Like this is, the way these models work, they can just keep on coming. But when I look at this picture, what I see are topics and these knowledge clusters that are very profound, using French fries for hair, or the different colors that are showing up. It's telling you or showing you that these models comprehend a lot. They really do. Just like the human brain finds patterns, there is a lot going on under the hood. And to go back when I had my deep learning company that we were doing, one of the things that we would do is we would train very large models at the time. And when we were done training, we would have the model do what's called unsupervised clustering. So it would take the images that it trained on and it would start trying to put them into different groups and patterns. And the interesting thing that we would find is some of those groupings and patterns were profound, where a domain expert would say, yes, that is something that's important to my business. That makes sense. And the interesting thing with AI is we are moving so quickly. If you thought ChatGPT was shocking, I thought it was shocking, by the way. GPT-4, also shocking. We keep going faster and faster with what we're able to do. And for people in the industry, that's exciting, but it can also be a little scary. And so one of the things that showed up on the internet almost 2 months ago is this new term called agentic workflows. These have been around for the last year, but no one has really defined a category. So these are LLMs working with LLMs. And these are the different, and so to quickly share with the audience what these categories are. So Andrew Ng, he's one of the top 10 minds in AI, has a very large footprint. He essentially says that agentic workflows, agents working with agents, there are 4 categories that he thinks exist. One of them is reflection. So reflection would be if I go to GPT-4 and I say, write me a marketing campaign or write me some code, and if it produces it, if I then say, please explain everything that is wrong with this and how to improve it and write something that's better. If you do that a few times, you can actually see that you can write better and better code, better and better marketing strategy. It really, if you have a rubric of success or some way to measure, so that's one way to do that. The other one is tool use. So if you have a software tool that can be driven with inputs, you can then take full advantage of whatever that does. An LLM is really good at driving. And then planning, that would be if you want to write a book. You can actually plan, you can have an LLM write a structure and begin filling out that structure and write a book for you. It's not going to be in your voice. It can be in your voice, but that's more complicated. But you writing a 200-page book based on a monologue is not that big of a deal today. And the multi-agents are just different agents with different types of job functions working together. So we're all familiar with what's called zero shot. Can you please write a data strategy for an e-commerce company that has already processed 1 million orders, and this thing will come out the other side? That's great. This was Andrew Ring presenting at Sequoia a month and a half ago. And this is a visual that describes what I'm talking about. So reflection, you have a critic, you try again and again. Tools, you can have an LLM really steer something else. Planning, think of writing a book or writing a complicated app. And then multi-agents are working together. So here's an example of planning. So I was in Dublin a couple years ago, actually 6 years ago, and I remember seeing these New York Times bestsellers. So these people have their face on a book, and there were 2 of them, and they both had their face on a book. And they were New York Times bestsellers, and I was talking to one of them, and I said, oh, I could never write a book. That is so, I never could, that's so hard. And this particular author said, oh, it's actually quite easy. And he said for a month in the car, he would record himself doing monologues. Chapter 1, talking for 30 minutes. Chapter 2, talking for 30 minutes. Totally disorganized. And then he took all of this information and gave it to a ghostwriter. And I think the number I remembered was $70,000. And maybe there was more to launch the book. But essentially taking all of this monologue and giving it to a human, he was able to produce a book. And when he said that, I thought, oh, that's not that bad if you have $70,000 to burn on a book. But the interesting thing is now with AI, I can do a monologue as long as I want. It doesn't have to be a few hours. It could be a year. Monologuing. Taking that very sloppy monologue. So if you ever recorded yourself doing a monologue, it's pretty sloppy. It's not a performance. It's the garbage equivalent of performance. But there's some knowledge nuggets in there, right? There's some concepts that are interesting. I can take that monologue and I can have an LLM produce a 50-page book from a monologue, which is pretty interesting. So for anyone who's been in the space of being an author, what does this mean? Before it took 9 months, and it was hard work. You nearly gave up, and you did a book. If someone is able to do this on a Saturday morning, what does that mean for? So there's a lot of things that are being disrupted right now. So the one that I've been very excited by the last year is this concept of adaptation. So it's having multiple LLMs working together in populations, and they're driving towards a goal. And I'm going to show you an example of this. So you already saw these Midjourney headshots. These are fun. I definitely encourage everyone in the room to play with these. Go home and try to come up with a crazy idea and see if you can create some of these wild, brilliant headshots using Midjourney. But for the sake, really to take you down this road, let's say I have a competition. I announce this competition. I wish I had $100,000 to give all of you, because I could just announce it. A $100,000 competition. We're going to have it go for a month. Submit your headshots, your AI-generated headshots. These are the subcategories, and one of you will get $100,000, and then you'll get the award as well, and that might mean more for a CV if you're a UX or creative director. What if I just had AI compete? Forget us. What if I just have AI compete? I'll just put all of this into GPT-4, and I'll tell it to try to win this competition. This is what it does. How many of you would pay $1,000 for that image and hang it on your wall? The funny thing is, I would imagine some of us might have 8 years ago, because we would have been shocked that is unbelievable, that's amazing. But today, it's garbage. No one wants that. And if I take that prompt that was generated, and if I put it into Midjourney, it's still that. Why why is it not beating what I was doing? Well, the key difference is it's the one shot. Remember? Input, output. It's not thinking, it's not iterating, it's not chasing a goal, there aren't multiple agents. But what if I release a flood of multiple agents? What if I do that, and what if they have a goal? They have a goal, they have the competition. And if I release this flood, it produces this. And this is not Midjourney version 6. This is 5.2. So 5.2 is producing results that feel like Midjourney 6. And the thing that I really like about this example is people talk about the soul is, or the eyes are the window to the soul. There is a room reflected in the eye. Do you know what's in the room? I'm having breakfast with my parents. I'm just kidding. But hopefully there are some people in the audience like, no, time out. Like, we have to pause this presentation. But it's interesting because when you start having rooms inside eyes, and it really opens up the floodgates for, like, what does this mean on the generative front? Like, what else is? So the thing I do want to call out with this competition, there's something very specific that I mentioned in the competition. I am asking it to do things that are quite difficult for AI. One of the things that's quite difficult for AI are some physical phenomena. Fluid dynamics, light scattering. And so the thing I love is AI is intentionally throwing these into the competition ring. So the fact that this woman has this complicated light scattering on the face, no human requested that. AI is chasing that. Check this one out. If you like fluid dynamics, it is intentionally trying to do things that it knows it struggles with because it's trying to win a competition. And it can do this hundreds or thousands of times, and it can stack rank and do relative ranking. And so the interesting thing is you start to see self-improvement. So why, if it does 1,000 of these and knows which one is better, it can put that back in the hopper and get smarter and smarter. But see, I don't see this as being anti-human. I see this as being a creative accelerant, because ultimately, who's the judge? We are the judge. We decide what good looks like. We can steer and direct. So just like you can run that with art, you can also run it with all sorts of things. So something that is very interesting is thinking about the interview of the future. Because I used to be in the assessment space. I've presented at SciOp, and I understand structuring interviews and defining competencies and different things like that. We are running into a world where we don't really understand what the future competencies are, and I'm going to be very specific. So if I'm a CTO and if I'm hiring a developer right now, do I hire a developer that I've hired in the past with a skill set that I know, or do I hire some kid who can produce 100 times more code than I can, and I don't know how they're doing it? They're doing these, these newer techniques. Who do I hire? And I think what you're going to run into, or what really should be happening now, is the skill that you want to be grading people on is their ability to leverage AI to do hard, difficult things. And it doesn't matter what your job is. And so what you're looking at is this is an interview question that is adaptively designed, trying to create a long-tail response from people in the interview process. So what do I mean by that? If I write an interview question, and let's say there are 3 people in the room that are the best. If their scores stack up on top of each other, that's bad. I don't want that. I want long tail. I don't want 3 people to win. I want 1 person to be better than the rest. And so what you're seeing in these interview questions, these are adaptively designed to produce a long tail response. So I'm going to read this question. So imagine this showing up as an interview question, which I think is quite funny because I think of like the classical interview questions like, tell me about your weaknesses, and you're supposed to like say some strengths, I work too hard or something. But here's, so imagine this showing up in an interview, and someone says, write a prompt for AI to generate a new philosophy of mind that integrates AI consciousness, human cognition, and emergent properties of complex systems. I could take that question and put it into GPT-4, but someone in the room, most of you in the room are going to crush that. You're going to do much, much better. And so I like these types of questions because it almost feels like a PhD thesis in the moment. Here's another one. So develop a prompt for AI to propose a unified theory that integrates dark matter, dark energy, and visible matter, addressing existing contradictions in current models. Imagine that being an interview question. Here's a code challenge. Write a complex programming problem that requires developing an algorithm capable of adapting and evolving in response to unpredictable data patterns and scenarios. The reason I love this question so much is it is so incredibly vague. And what does the developer have to do? They have to handle everything that I'm going to throw at it. So what this opens up the door for is the take-home challenge for programming that maybe was hundreds of lines of code. The person that wins this challenge, they did not write 100 lines of code. Whoever wins this challenge, they probably wrote tens of thousands of lines of code because they don't know what the assessment is. And so they have to be prepared for every possible scenario. But hopefully you can see that whoever is winning at this is very interesting. They are doing much more work than the rest of us, and we don't really understand what the core competencies are. And so if you can write a book from a sloppy monologue, you can write an RFP, you can do incredible things very, very quickly. So the warning for people that, I don't think anyone in the room is excited to go write a book tonight or this weekend, but the warning for people, if they were excited, is it's still going to feel very synthetic. It might be good for structuring, just slamming out a big book, but you would still want to go through and write, because I think the human soul really isn't in it. But adding your voice is definitely something that it's pretty straightforward to add your voice. So if I wanted to take the last decade of your writing and adaptively throw it into a book, that would be fairly straightforward to do. So here's an image. I like to say this represents a PhD. So I'm going to explain what you're looking at. I do apologize. I hate custom plots, and I hate custom plots that aren't grokkable in 5 or 10 seconds. I think this one's important, so I'll explain it. Every bar you see is an algorithm that was invented by a human. So think of a PhD thesis. So if someone in the room decides, I want to go get a computer science PhD, and I'm sure there's some of you in the room that have one, you want to go get another one. Well, what does that entail? What does that mean? Well, it means you're going to go pick a school, you're going to go pick an advisor, an algorithm category, and you're going to spend the next 2 to 3 years understanding the knowledge base, because you should do that. If you try to publish the first couple months, that's quite reckless, that's foolish. You might look like an idiot. You really need to understand the existing knowledge base, what other people have done, this is how it works, and then once you're ready, you'll work with your advisor to come up with a few ideas, inspirations, and you will try those things for the next 9 months, 12 months, maybe longer, and you might succeed or you might fail. It's not your fault. You're working with your advisor to try this, and the cost of failure is pretty severe, but through grit or sheer luck, you will accomplish this goal eventually, and then that's the 5 to 7 year PhD. So everything I described can be automated for some algorithm categories, not for all of them yet. And so what you're looking at is every bar up there that is not red is an algorithm that is written completely from scratch for using these new methods. Lower is better. Lower is more competitive, and that second half of the plot demonstrates that you now have you can run to the right. And the key question is, what's stopping me from running a mile to the right, going out to the salt flats? Nothing. Compute. And I'm inspired by this. I think this is exciting. Some people might see this as a little concerning. You definitely want to be proactive. You want to be thinking about how to do this. How do you define goals well? How do you use this responsibly? But I like to compare this, going back to the brain, so going all the way back to the beginning of the talk, that we all have brains that run through life. We gain knowledge, and we try to assess that knowledge, and we apply it to future decisions. If you think about the highlight of your career, I'm 41. I had to think about that for a second. If you think about the highlight of your career, often we go back in our career timeline, and we say, you know what the highlight of my career was? At this moment in time, I worked on a problem that was beyond me. It required, the risk of failure was possible. And I had to work with a team of people. And I had to study, I had to learn, and through grit or luck, we accomplished this goal, and that meant a lot to me at the time. And those things are quite sparse in our timeline. I like to think of it as the giraffe in the zoo. So we have lived in this life where our brains we are the giraffe in the zoo. And our kids and the future generations, that will be a Monday morning. That'll just be a normal thing for them. Of course they do impossible problems all the time. Why would they do anything they know how to do? That seems strange. But today, if you think about it, we do things we know how to do all day long. Writing code, reading emails, and a lot of that stuff is going to change very quickly. So I didn't want to leave time for questions because I think that's where we get the most value. So I'm going to leave 10 minutes for questions. And For anyone that wants to get a hold of me, if they're not able to ask a question, jepsontaylor.com, or you can find me on LinkedIn. But so I think now we've got a runner with a mic, I think, and I'd love to open up for questions. If anyone has any questions about AI, innovation, just raise your hand. Okay, perfect. We've got someone right here.
I'll ask it.
Okay.
When you're doing prompts for Midjourney, do you find it better to do like a more specific prompt initially, or to have it kind of reiterate as you go along?
So with Midjourney, I have found if I use GPT-4 to do the prompts, and so if I was doing a live demo right now, I have found through my experience that I want the most important aspects of the prompt to be at the beginning, because I notice if I have something that's at the end of the prompt, it often doesn't show up. And so I will go into GPT-4 and I'll come up with a concept and I'll say, write 10 to 15 sentences, incredible detail, describe to me like I'm blind, most important details at the front, be very specific, as many details as possible, and then I'll ask it to produce 3. So it'll produce 3 different variations, and I put that into Midjourney, and then I might, you could do that for 30 minutes or an hour, just do that, and you'll find a thread you want to pull on. You'll find something that shows up, and then in Midjourney, you can do the normal driving. I have found I'm much more surprised with that approach, the two of them combined, because I think GPT-4 puts in a lot more details that I would not know. So, yeah. It's hard for me to see the lights. There's a hand back here.
Hi, so I'm an artist that works in AI, and I'm just curious, when you're talking about agentic workflows, creating art, you mentioned that part of the process was the agents coming up with something, evaluating if it was good or not, and then moving forward. I'm just curious, were you able to automate the evaluating if it's good? Because so far for me, that's had to be like a human process.
Yeah, so those images you saw, they are being scored by an internal rubric. I'm trying to remember for that's from last fall. I'm trying to remember what the rubric was. So they are being assessed internally. Actually, it is being assessed by GPT-4. So it is showing, there's 2 ways to think about it. So when you're doing the assessment, you can ask for a score from 0 to 100 where you're trying to define your rubric. The other thing you can do is you can do relative ranking comparisons. So you just give it 2 pieces of art when you ask which one is better, left or right. And if you do that over and over and over again, that's an easier way to do the relative ranking. But if you trust your rubric on the first one, you can be very specific. And if that's not working, it often comes down to the details. Does that make sense? The relative ranking is that's like a pretty easy way to, but you have to do a lot of iterations. So.
Have you considered doing a similar system to be the next great superstar of music, but using like Suno AI, just running it through the current system you have?
The crux, that's a great question. The crux is really coming down to how you score the rubric. So if you built a system that you trusted could gauge good music, which definitely could be possible. So if you trust how you're scoring it, that is a harder problem to do than the art one, but I think you definitely could. I think you could come up with your own internal scoring system, or you could do the human feedback if you had enough people that were involved where they're listening to little clips left and right. Yeah. So actually, you reminded me, we did a machine learning competition 5 years ago where you had to predict from a sound clip how popular a Taylor Swift song was, and it was pretty easy to predict, but actually that was problematic because the key question to ask, is it really finding what good music looks like, or is it differentiating between her new stuff and the country? And that's stuff you kind of have to disambiguate a little bit.
Jepson, have you had, it's pretty new, Claude 3. Have you had any experience yet playing around with Claude 3?
I've seen a lot of people talking about it. I haven't personally started playing with it, but it's on my to-do.
Yeah, I've spent like 10 minutes just to see, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think the thing now for people that are developing these systems is you really want them to be LLM agnostic, because the likelihood of a new LLM showing up that is better than the ones today is guaranteed. And so it's wise for you, just like people have different cloud providers where they will move around depending on the cost, you're going to also design systems as well. So it'd be wise for you to But also this is important for anything that's mission critical. So if you have something, let's say you have a customer success feedback loop or chatbot, for some things, the confidence that it's answering the question correctly is high. So you don't need any review. But you can imagine certain questions coming in from a customer where the confidence drops. And if the confidence drops, you can throw it out to a human queue, or you can throw it into a more expensive LLM processor where you now have 2 or 3 LLMs that are trying to kind of decide together. And so that's something that other people are talking about. But you wouldn't want to do that inference cost for everyone. If anything, you want to do, most of them are GPT-3 or whatever's the cheapest, just firing as fast as possible. Or if you're really good, just have bag of words. Just go back to like 2010 and do something like that, unless the confidence is a little outside the norm. But yeah, I've seen people talking about it, so I think definitely check it out.
What would be your best advice for integrating a product photo into lifestyle photos? Because I've been able to do that through like Midjourney and be able to put a product like in a lifestyle environment. But when I try to take a product photo and integrate that to like a person using the actual product in a certain way, that's kind of where I've come to, I guess, some walls that broken down.
I think the use case that you're bringing up, some of these tools like Midjourney or even DALL-E 2 or 3, they're not really designed for that use case because that's a very specific use case. We actually have a startup here in Utah that I'll give a shout out to, Run Diffusion. So they're doing a lot of this stuff internally. They've got a lot of these knobs. And so I wish their CTO was here on stage, because not only would he have a very specific answer for you, but he could actually route you to tools. So I think what you're going to see in the market is you're going to see tools that are showing up that are just tailored to that. And they're not going to have the same Midjourney quality. They're not going to do these other things, but they will do that really well. And so that's definitely coming. I wouldn't be surprised if it's here. They would be the ones to ask. So yeah, Run Diffusion.
Thank you.
Yep. We've got 3 minutes left. Any more questions about AI? Here's.
So kind of like how you said, like with the book, and how the human soul might need like the integration with the book, right? Do you think that with the coming forth of like AI videos that's going to also need the same thing, or is it going to be like a major disruption in like the movie entertainment?
I'm of the camp it's going to be a major disruption, and I think this is something that's exciting. So that you're going to have the Toy Story moment, but for generative video, and I think we can begin imagining what that will look like. And so what I like to say to people is, there will be a movie in theaters, whether it's 2 years, 5 years, it'll be pretty quick, where it is completely made from generative video. And if you had to make that video today using the methods we know, it might cost several $1 billion for rendering. And so that's something we can look forward to, right? So we can't really, maybe we can imagine what that looks like, but the thing with rendering is they keep going down, like with Mandalorian, like they're able to just go down and down and down. But I think that's what it's going to open up. If you want to really nerd out, there is something, from a technology perspective, there's nothing stopping us. I like to put technology into different buckets. So you have the hobbyists, you have the company, and then you have like a government entity. And I would say we have the technology components that if a government decided, I would even say if a commercial entity decided that they wanted to have a Rick and Morty episode created randomly on the fly that was indistinguishable from a real one, we are in that technology territory. A hobbyist can't do it because the compute is so significant and the talent is significant. But back to your question, I think we're moving into a future where you go down into your theater and you say, I feel like watching a movie that is Toy Story directed by Tarantino and add something else, and then you're watching it, and then you pause it, and you're having a laugh with your friends, and you say, well, how about this, how about that? Like the technology building blocks they're not blocking you from that, but we're gonna have to wait a little bit. But yeah, I love the question. We have time for one more question.
Do you have any tools that are customer service tools where you can build kind of, so if you're putting the inputs of your company and kind of the wiki of your company, and it's its own GPT where customers can ask questions and it gets answers from that kind of information database. Is there tools out there that you would recommend or call out?
Yeah, GPT Builder. What the question you're asking, it's kind of squarely centered on fine-tuning LLMs. So if you have your own knowledge base of activity, you can fine-tune on GPT Builder, or they have all these other startups that are allowing you to fine-tune. Because really, that's the key difference. If I just go to a GPT-4 session right now and someone asks a question about your product, you're disappointed. It's like, that's not the right answer. But if you have that history of the right answers going through the people, that should be something you can start testing now with pretty quickly. Honestly, that should be something that just takes a few days with engineers. You just say, hey, go check out GPT Builder or an LLM fine-tuning service and fine-tune on this. And you could have an engineer do it in a sprint and come back and show that this is the quality today. And if you want to do it responsibly, if it's not quite at the quality that you think you need right now, then you start doing that thing I mentioned before where you have routers. Because there might be certain questions where 80, 90% just fly through that system, but the other ones actually have to get kicked up to a buddy check or something. But we're definitely there that your engineers can be thinking about this and playing with it.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, we're out of time. Thanks, everyone.